Thank you for coming to this talk on organizational transformation. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to look at change management in a very broad sense to try and understand all the different components that go into it and challenges that we face with it, as well as looking at a model of what we call the three dimensions of organizational transformation to give us a new approach. My name is Joseph Drasin. I lead our enterprise planning and continuous improvement group at the University of Maryland, as well as I'm a faculty in the Honors College where I teach courses on consulting practices and science. You have my contact information. As I will say a couple times, this is a very, very abbreviated version of this. So if you have questions about any of the topics, particularly the model and the case studies behind it and how to implement it, things like that, just reach out to me. You have many ways to get in touch. As I said, the EPCI group that I lead, we are a practice education and research group within the University of Maryland. Most of our time is spent as a consultancy where we help mostly internal clients within the university with process improvement, change management, organizational development, do a lot of project management, kind of traditional consulting engagements. We then have an education side where most of us do training, teaching, both in the classroom, undergraduate and graduate, as well as workshops in professional settings. We give talks at conferences like this, as well as we put out a lot of publications with kind of our findings and practices, which leads to the third part, which is the research we conduct, looking not only at our own work, but kind of trends in the field of what are the best practices, what are lessons being learned, how can we keep this discipline constantly getting better? And then, of course, we apply those into our practice. So that's the group and kind of the context that I'm coming from. I've been with the university for almost a decade now. My career before that was in commercial consulting in a number of industries, which led me to higher ed. So when we talk about organizational transformation in the next short time, we're going to describe transformation and what I'm speaking about for context. We're going to look at transformation failures and how they can occur, and then really how to approach for success. And as I said, I'm really only going to have time to talk about the framework at a pretty high level. And we're not going to be able to get into the tools, but again, happy to discuss those with you. So starting at the high level, the facts are we usually fail at large scale change in our organizations. And that's not just a higher ed thing. It's really, I've worked in many, many industries. It's pretty endemic throughout. A lot of it has to do with IT systems, but I can tell you, having worked in mergers and acquisitions, there's lots of failures that are just as bad as any large IT system failure. And why is this? Why do we continually fail often at these really large, complex efforts? And one of the reasons, and one we're going to really take a look at today, is what I see as the over-focusing. We look at one aspect of the change and we really drill into it and usually do it quite well. But the unfortunate thing when we look at transformation is it doesn't matter how well you do any piece. If one of the legs of the stool is missing, it still falls down. And when we're talking about change, and really in this talk, we're talking large scale changes. Again, mergers, acquisitions, reorganizations, large IT implementations, new strategy implementations. We're talking about the transformation of a system. And that doesn't allow us to focus on one part because there's three components of any system that we need to move. We have the people in the system. Their talents, their technology, their knowledge, their personalities, the culture of your organization, kind of the social norms of your organization. We have the processes. That's those activities that actually deliver value, that take you from a raw material to some finished good, that get a student from being in high school into one of your classes, being educated, getting a diploma, getting a great job, those kind of processes, all the way from hiring to paying bills to teaching, education, research, all those processes together. And then we have technology. Almost everything we do, there's large technology systems, there's data, there's governance around those data, there's rules around those data. And we have to take all of those and all three of those and move from one state into a new state. And as we're going to talk about, if any part of that doesn't happen, we have problems. So we got to take the people, the process, and the technology. And if we want true organizational transformation, we got to overlay all of those into this blend. So I want to dig into each real quickly, kind of give you an idea of what I'm speaking of, and then we're going to talk about a what goes wrong. So when we're talking about people, this is sometimes referred to as like the organizational health or organizational readiness, is that non-tangible part of the equation. I like to think of it as like a health checkup for your organization. What's the level of engagement with your employees, not just with your project or your transformation, but just in general? And are they aware of your project? Because you're gonna have to take that engagement and move it. What about the people's identity and their relationship, not just with each other, but to the organization? Because again, their identity is going to move. It's going to change. Their relationships are going to change. And then the purpose, the meaning, the vision, the whole strategy of your organization. How do they feel about that? How do they fit into that? I'll warn you, if you're ever using the phrase, people need to buy in to this, or we need buy-in, or we got to sell them on this, that's a warning sign. That is showing that you are having trouble transitioning from one state to the new state. How about the level of trust in the organization? Do people trust their leadership? Do you have a challenge there? Particularly now, what's the level of anxiety? Is there fatigue in your organization? And then we finally look at messaging and language and communications and that. Again, all these are going to have to transform. If you are interested, I have a whole talk on this called The Psychology of Change, where I spend the whole time talking just about what people experience during change and the kind of psychological impact of change on people. So the whole 25 minutes on just that. The second part we need to look at, as we talked about, is the processes. And this is, again, the value change or the end-to-end process design. We are delivering something of value in a completely new way. And again, we're talking about the as-is and to-be process designs. You know, if you're a business analyst or a process analyst or business process engineer, this is your work. How about the policies and rules of the organization? Those may have to shift from one state into another, or they may restrict how you can change. The org chart. A lot of times people talk about the organizational chart as people. I think it's better to think about it as process, because that's the organizational structure that executes your value. And then there's certainly people in it, and that goes back to the people part, but kind of how they organize, that is really based much more around how you operate from a process standpoint. The value chain, obviously, what are you delivering and how are you delivering and what sequence delivers it? And then the decision points in that value chain. Again, we have another talk that Mark is giving on the challenges with digitization, which really looks at some of these common failures in the process area. And then finally, we have technology. And this is really kind of the origins of change management, 1.0. This is where we're actually pretty good at change management. This is, IT systems and capabilities moving, upgrading software. The interfaces and integrations, those have to transition because, then the data ownership and governance, that's going to move from one place to another. Obviously, the downstream impacts and doing all that impact analysis and all that great stuff. Obviously, particularly privacy now, thinking about how all those aspects are going to go from one place to another. And then, of course, kind of looping back to the people, the internal knowledge and training that has to take place, all that has to transition. So when one of those doesn't happen, what does that look like? So I wanted to start with, let's take a piece out of the puzzle. So we have a great new technology. We've done some amazing process re-engineering. We have some super efficient processes that are going to operate on this awesome new third generation cloud self-service technology, but we never actually engaged our staff. What does that tend to look like in an organization? What do we see when that happens? Well, we usually find a lack of engagement. How can people engage with something that they either A, don't know enough about, or haven't been part of, don't feel ownership and autonomy towards? We often see poor utilization of the new technology because, again, people haven't been trained, they're not aware of it, or they don't see the value of it. Again, not feeling part of it. Often we see improper execution, particularly if they haven't been trained effectively. We see a lot of shadow systems. So you just implemented your new technology and your new processes, but without engaging people, they are often still going to operate using existing systems and existing capabilities. And often what we find is this gets seen as resisting change, but I will argue, and if you go to my psychology of change, it's really not about resisting change at all. It's often these other things get interpreted that way, but it's because there wasn't an effective engagement with the people. Okay, let's take another scenario. You've got an awesome new technology. You've worked with the people. They're excited about this new technology, but you haven't looked at any process. You're essentially implementing the exact same process as you were before on a cool new technology, and people are excited about it. This is, and again, if you go to Mark's talk, this is what we call the digitization failure. This is when you're just taking the exact same processes that didn't work before and you're putting them in new window dressing, and they still don't work so effectively. You're going to miss out on opportunities. Even if you don't completely have a digitization failure, you're certainly not taking full advantage of the technology if you're not adjusting your processes to take advantage of it. The other thing we see a lot of times is what we call efficient failure, which means your technology, you've got this new technology and your people are using it, and you're really efficient now, but you're still failing because the problem actually was in your processes, not your technology or your people. And then much like what we talked about with people, you're going to see workarounds. People will still be using their workarounds because the process isn't working effectively. And we've heard the phrase before many times is, we bought this new software and it doesn't work either. And after you've gone through that a couple times, it might not be the software. And we've had clients who literally are on their third or fourth package trying to tackle the same problem, still thinking that's a software issue. So how about you've done all that great process work, you've done engagement with your staff, but there's no technology change. Well, first I'll say that this is actually quite rare, particularly in higher ed, where you don't have a couple of the scenarios where this would occur. I mean, really, almost any transformation of any nature these days has a huge technology piece, even if it's not upgrading technology. So you could have an organizational restructuring that doesn't involve any technology, but as we'll talk about in our model, there's a lot of challenges with that because even though the technology isn't changing, ownership and governance absolutely will. And so you need to think about that. And then you have mergers and acquisition. And this is, again, when technology is not considered during the M&A, and this is where I spent a good deal of my career before, tons of problems occur. For instance, Verizon, and I didn't even bother to look up how many years and decades they've been merged with Verizon Wireless, they still have separate technology systems. And it causes no end of challenges in that organization. So just bringing people together, improving your processes, your technology really still needs to be lockstep with that. I do want to acknowledge that there are some culture changes that involve just people and process and don't really have a technology component, but those are not usually what we're engaging with these large scale transformation efforts. But I do want to acknowledge because it is absolutely a thing. So how do we address all this? I mean, this is a lot. You have people challenges. So that's, we're talking psychology, sociology, organizational development. We have process issues where we have engineering and analytics and analysis. And then we have technology with engineers, software developers, and business intelligence. These are a lot of different disciplines. Well, the first thing you need is a really diverse team. And when we talk about diversity, we mean all the dimensions of diversity. And I particularly want to draw attention to some of the areas that don't get considered around discipline experience, organizational location, your rank, and things of that nature. These are all important, but I find often with teams put together for large transformation efforts, they're often missing these things. And just like if you have a homogeneous group, gender-wise or nationality or ethnically, if you're missing out on different parts of your organization or different levels in your organization, you're going to also miss perspectives that are really, really valuable. So that's why I say the first thing you need for any large scale effort is a really diverse team among all these different dimensions of diversity. But there is a framework to help you, and that was where a lot of our work has come from. There's a framework that essentially drives our work and has been developed over many, many years. And as I said, again, I'm going to go pretty quickly through this, but happy to talk about it more. Really, each part of this framework is a whole day of a workshop if you really want to dive into it. So the 3 dimensions of holistic design. So we have the horizontal design, the vertical design. We're very creative there. And then the third one we call organizational depth. And if I could draw in 3 dimensions, you would see that there is these 3 dimensions of it. So the first one is our end-to-end horizontal design, and this is the value chain. This is how you're going to get some raw material to some consumer in a way that they can use it. This is your classic process engineering work, understanding the value chain of your organization. How do we get a thing posted all the way to someone in a seat being productive? And we got to do that whole thing end to end. If you're working in an organization of any size, you have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. But you need to start by thinking of your high level value chains and how this change is going to impact those. That's really where it starts. So you're going to package all that up, and that's going to become the first step of your vertical design, the 6 enablers, as we call this. This is drawn from, adapted from a lot of work by Alex Sharp. He has a book out there. I really encourage you to read it. It's excellent from a process design standpoint. So we're going to take that horizontal design, and that's going to become our workflow. Literally, how does the work flow through our organization? The people, the processes, the systems that kind of take it from one place to another. We're then going to look at the second enabler, which is policies and rules, and how those are going to be affected by and affect our transformation. We're going through a large scale change at Maryland with a new system implementation, and we have reviewed over 350 policies just within our university and the system, because we need to know, how do those constrict or enable our organizational transformation? What aspects of the transformation may push back on those policies and rules? So you really want to take a lot of time to think about that. Just as much time as you're thinking about that workflow and how you're going to change those, you need to look at the policies and rules. Then another big area you want to spend some time with is looking at motivation and measure. People really do react to incentives. How you motivate them, how you measure them on their annual review, all that stuff, that comes into play in any process design and any organizational transformation. If you're going to change how your organization is going to operate in some aspect, you need to think how that's going to affect everyone's current way of being, their success is being measured. We worked with an organization once that dealt with a lot of sales, and they were looking at some really valuable organizational transformations. And we worked through with them on how their workflow would change, how their policies would change, all the enablers we're about to talk about. But then it turned out one of the most critical changes was not being able to be enacted, because how people were, the salespeople in particular, were being motivated was in this part of the process. So they really didn't have any interest in improving that other part, because that was going to cause them, frankly, to lose money. And so you really can't make that adaptation to your organization so you understand how it's going to affect the individuals in it, which of course is the other part, is about talent alignment in the organization. This is not just looking at, obviously, skills, capabilities, talent. Do you have the people necessary to execute this new value chain in your new transformed way? But also, how do the people engage? What is their attitudes? A lot of those things I was talking back earlier on, and I have that other talk on, is looking at the psychology of the people. How are they going to feel, move through this change, and how are you going to adapt them? Then we do look at the technology. Obviously, the systems that are going to have to move, that are going to be upgraded. But as we'll talk about later, it's more than just the technology. It's how people utilize the technology, how the organization engages with the technology. How does that technology interact with that workflow? And how about the data on that technology? And that's not just, coming up with definitions and coming up with a good data model, though really important to do. Don't try a transformation without it. But how about governance and ownership of that data and rules around that data? That's all going to become really critically important as we start to get into the next dimension. So you want to be looking at every aspect of your organization and how it all goes through that horizontal design. How do the policies and rules affect that horizontal design? How are the motivation and the measures maybe going to warp the design? Do you have the talent alignment, and is your organization actually able to execute it? Do you have the technology systems, the correct technology systems to execute it? And finally, how is your data going to flow through that? There's nothing worse than having the right data, but each part of your value chain is using it differently. Each organization is using it differently. It really makes your challenge extremely difficult. So again, we're going to take this dimension, we're going to package up these 6 enablers that, as you can see, are people, process, and technology, going right back to where we started. And we're ready for the third dimension, which is we're going to take all 3 parts of these and start, and that's going to become our strategy for organizational depth, really the foundation, and we're almost there now. So we've got a great strategy, we've got cool technology, we've got the people, we have the workflow, we've got a great value chain. We actually know how this is going to work. We have a strategic plan to make this happen. There's still two more things we need to worry about. The first is the political dimension of your organization. I don't mean that in any way as a negative thing. It's just a reality that you have to think about. How does this new strategy, how does it affect the organization structure, the powers, those decision makers? Remember, we were talking about decision points when you're changing your workflow. Well, that's going to have political impacts. Remember, I was talking about data governance and data ownership. That's a huge political aspect. How about ownership of the technology? Again, I mentioned earlier, working with mergers and acquisitions, two companies would come together or they'd reorganize, and no one talked about who owns these systems, who owns the governance of these systems, who is the steward of the data now that we're in this new organization. You need to be thinking about every one of those 6 enablers, motivation, talent alignment, in a political lens, if you want to be successful. And then finally, we're going to take it to a cultural lens. And this is going to take those same ideas and think about, how is our organizational culture going to adapt to this? If we're going to change the political aspects and the governance, is our culture okay with that? Is our culture okay with a centralization structure when we build workflows? Even if politically we're okay with that, culturally, does that just fit with who we are? Changing how we're going to measure and motivate people, does that fit with our culture? For instance, I've worked in organizations where providing bonuses is absolutely a typical thing you would do for performance. Other areas where that is just not part of the culture. So if your strategy in your change of your first dimension, your value delivery, was based on changing something in your second dimension, the motivation and measurement process, if your culture will not allow it, it's a non-starter. And if you think strategy is hard, or political aspects are hard, cultural aspects are far more difficult to adapt an organization. So you need to be thinking about all 3 of these dimensions, and you need to be thinking about the people, the processes, and the technology as they apply in each of those lenses. And that is the 3 dimensions of holistic design. It's that end-to-end value delivery. It's those 6 enablers across that value, and it's how all 6 of those get packaged into the strategic, the political, and the cultural lens. And only when you've really thought through things and worked through them in those levels do you really have an opportunity for tremendous success. And you really have to work through all of them. We tend to like to spend a lot of time, I run a process improvement group. They love to, and I do too, spend time in workflow. That's kind of our natural thing. But you have to spend just as much time looking at the technology, looking at the data, looking at the policies, and so forth. So I wanted to work through a couple thoughts I had on just kind of how to work through it. Again, get in contact with me if you want any more information. But as I said before, you really need to solicit engagement from all levels of the organization. Don't just talk to executives. Don't just have a steering committee of directors. You really want all levels if you want to have the best opportunity of success. That end-to-end value chain, everyone should know it. If there is a person on your transformation effort who does not understand the true end-to-end of what you're trying to deliver, you're going to have a challenge. You need to identify the governance and ownership of processes. All that workflow that we talked about, there needs to be an alignment with governance. And that's when we really learn how important the political and cultural lens is. You can't change process if it's not clear who has ownership in your organization. The strategy that you develop, as I said, it has to be aligned with the politics and the culture of your organization. Politics and culture will just dominate strategy. It's not even close. Everyone should be engaged in those 6 enablers. Those are a lot of different concepts that come from a lot of different ways of thinking. So you really want a diverse team to engage with them. And then finally, remember that whatever problems you're having in a transformation, it's rarely the technology. I should keep track of it, but almost every project I've worked on in my career, the number of times there's really a technology issue as opposed to an organizational issue, a cultural issue, a political issue. It's 10 to 1 at best. Technology is almost never truly the issue. It's often where we see these other issues surface. So I appreciate your time. Again, there's several other talks we're giving in our group. We have the psychology of change, as I said, I'm giving, which really digs into that people aspect. The problems with digitization is going to look really at that process aspect and the challenges we've seen with this blind digitization. And then finally, a talk on visualization of data, and a picture is worth more than 1,000 words, and some strategies you can use for really impactful delivery of analytics. So again, thank you for your time. You have my contact information. I look forward to hearing from you, and have a great conference.